We're turning now to London, where a growing confrontation has unfolded between the government and Britain's farmers. As many of you know, farmers traveled to Westminster to pressure the government to abandon plans that would impose a 20% inheritance tax on farms valued above £1 million. What followed was not symbolic protest, but a nationwide mobilization. Nearly 2,000 tractors converged on the capital. 14 major routes into central London were disrupted. Public transport delays spread across 6 boroughs. Economic analysts estimate £52 million in lost productivity in a single day. This was not theater. It was not ideological posturing. It was driven by desperation. By mid-morning, tractor convoys entered London from every direction: Essex, Kent, Lincolnshire, Yorkshire, carrying a message farmers say has been ignored for years. They argue they are being pushed to the edge by government policy, rising taxes as margins collapse, expanding regulations without safeguards, and political decisions made by leaders who have never worked the land or balanced a harvest budget. Today, farmers said they had run out of quiet options. They needed to be seen. What surprised Westminster was not the scale of the mobilization, but the public reaction. There was no panic, no scattering crowds. Instead, people filmed, waved, and applauded. Across Britain, a belief that has been quietly forming became unmistakable. You may survive without politicians. You cannot survive without farmers. Support came from commuters, shopkeepers, parents, and workers who may never touch a plow, but understand one simple reality. If the people who grow the food are pushed beyond breaking point, everything else follows. Farmers accuse the government of withdrawing support while demanding compliance, signing trade deals that undercut domestic producers, and collecting public money without offering protection in return. This was not an attempt to overthrow government. It was an attempt to force attention. As tractors surrounded the capital, one question cut through the gridlock louder than any engine. If the people who feed the country feel abandoned, who is this government really serving? If you want clear, unfiltered reporting on moments like this, take a second to like and subscribe. Now, let's break down how this unfolded. Underscore 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 underscore. A capital deliberately brought to a standstill. By late morning, London was not frozen by accident or security alert, it was intentionally slowed. Tractor convoys moved deliberately along key arteries, feeding the capital, turning roads designed for speed into statements of resistance. Traffic backed up for miles. Buses stood idle. Trains ran late. Deliveries failed. For hours, London's rhythm was set not by Transport for London or the Home Office, but by farmers who said they had exhausted every other avenue. Police described the operation as unprecedented yet controlled. There were no mass arrests, no clashes, no scenes of panic. Officers focused on containment, escorting convoys, guarding junctions, preventing knock-on disruption. Senior police sources privately admitted the optics were unavoidable. A protest this large could not be broken up without triggering a political backlash far greater than the disruption itself. What followed surprised even veteran observers. Office workers leaned from windows to film. Pedestrians applauded as tractors passed government buildings. Placards taped to cabs and trailers carried blunt messages. No farmers. No food. You can't eat policy. We feed Britain. Who feeds us? This was not an urban protest calling for abstract reform. It was a rural revolt arriving physically at the center of power, forcing a city-focused political class to confront those far outside Westminster's bubble. Underscore 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 underscore. Years of pressure boil over. Farmers involved said this moment had been building for years. Rising fuel costs. Shrinking subsidies. Environmental rules imposed without compensation. Trade agreements they claim leave British producers exposed to global price shocks they cannot absorb. Many described government consultations as formalities, meetings where outcomes felt predetermined and frontline voices acknowledged politely, then ignored. What made this day different was not the grievances. Those have existed for years. It was the scale and the confidence. By early afternoon, it was clear this was no fringe action. Social media filled with videos of tractors entering London, shared hundreds of thousands of times. Many came from people who had never paid attention to agricultural policy before. For many, this stopped being a farmers' protest and became a broader judgment on governance itself. One commuter put it simply, "You can debate politics endlessly, but you cannot debate food." Inside Westminster, the response was cautious to the point of paralysis. Ministers avoided live interviews. Official statements repeated familiar language about respecting protest rights, while minimizing disruption, language that satisfied no one. Behind closed doors, advisors warned that heavy-handed action could flip public sympathy decisively against the government. These were not protesters easily dismissed as agitators. These were producers, employers embedded in the country's survival infrastructure. Underscore 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 underscore. Silence from power, sympathy from the public. As the day continued, symbolism overtook logistics. Political disputes usually play out in studios and chambers. This confrontation played out in steel, diesel, and mud-streaked tires rolling over marble streets. It reframed the issue. Not who is loudest, but who is essential. As tractors held their positions, the deeper problem emerged: silence. For hours, there was no direct address from Downing Street. No emergency statement. No senior minister meeting protest leaders publicly. Instead, there were background briefings and familiar phrases about dialogue through appropriate channels. For many farmers, that language confirmed exactly why they were there. They say those channels have existed for years and delivered nothing: consultations without outcomes, reviews without reversals, promises without protection. Inside government, sources describe a split. Some urged swift concessions, warning that public support was already leaning heavily toward the farmers. Others feared that yielding would invite similar actions from other strained sectors. But the real issue was credibility. This protest crossed political lines. Farmers involved said they had voted for different parties over the years. This was not about ideology. It was about survival. Polling during the disruption showed majority public support despite the economic cost. Commuters expressed frustration, but also understanding. The anger was aimed less at farmers and more at a political system viewed as distant and insulated. One question kept surfacing: if farmers cannot afford to farm, what exactly is being protected? Underscore 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 underscore. From policy dispute to test of legitimacy. By late afternoon, officials privately acknowledged the situation had moved beyond a single tax proposal. It had become a test of legitimacy. Every hour the tractors remained visible, the symbolism deepened. What farmers described, being taxed, regulated, and undercut while receiving little protection, resonated far beyond agriculture. Shop owners cited energy costs. Hauliers cited fuel taxes. Parents cited food prices. The tractors became symbols of wider economic anxiety. Government messaging struggled to regain control as images of applause and solidarity continued to spread. This protest did not divide the public, it unified it. Even police officers, speaking quietly to reporters, acknowledged the difference. One summed it up bluntly: "This doesn't feel like a protest against the country. It feels like a protest for it." That distinction matters. Governments survive crises by shaping narratives. This time, the narrative slipped away. Online, one message repeated endlessly: "You can replace ministers. You cannot replace producers. You can live without politicians. You cannot live without food." Those ideas spread without organization, which is what makes them powerful and dangerous for any administration. Officials now worry this will not remain isolated. Once one essential sector sees that visibility works and public sympathy follows function, others may follow. Logistics workers, energy suppliers, people who don't argue ideology but necessity. That is the real fear, not riots, not rebellion, but alignment between those who keep the system running and the public who depend on them. Underscore 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 underscore. A warning, not a riot. By the end of the day, Westminster had not fallen. But something more important had shifted. Britain watched a protest driven not by slogans, but by survival. Not by ideology, but by necessity. And the government struggled to answer it. Because when the people who feed the nation say they've been pushed too far, that isn't noise. It's a warning. This was never just about blocking roads. It was about exposing priorities. A system that can fund almost everything except those who produce food. A leadership that speaks of resilience while draining the people who make it possible. So the question Britain is now asking will not disappear tomorrow. If farmers feel abandoned, who is this government really working for? Tell us what you think in the comments.